Hello viewers, welcome back to my channel Legal Decipher. In the previous video we had discussed about chapter 9 of the Indian Evidence Act of 1872. If you have not seen that video, you can go and check it. The link is in the description below. In today's video we are going to cover chapter 10 and chapter 11 of the Indian Evidence Act. We'll go through the chapters and try to understand the substance therein. So if you're new here, please like and subscribe to my channel to get the video notifications. So let's get started. Now in this video we are going to cover chapter 10 and chapter 11 of the Indian Evidence Act. Now chapter 11 consists of only one section, whereas chapter 10 is a huge chapter. It talks about the examination of witnesses. Now section 135 says order of production and examination of witnesses. It says the order in which witnesses are produced and examined shall be regulated by law and practice for the time being related to civil and criminal procedure respectively, and in the absence of any such law, the discretion of the court. So what will be the order of production and examination of the witnesses will be determined as to the regulations that are by law practiced for the time being related to civil and criminal procedures respectively. But if there is no such regulations or laws at practice for the time being in force, then in absence of any such law, it will be determined by the discretion of the court. Section 136 says judge to decide as to admissibility of evidence. So when either party proposes to give evidence of any fact, the judge may ask the party proposing to give the evidence in what manner the alleged fact, if proved, would be relevant. So whenever a party decides to give an evidence or proposes to give an evidence, then the judge is of the duty to ask him whether such evidence would be relevant to the subject matter or not, and the judge shall admit the evidence if he thinks that the fact if proved would be relevant and not otherwise. The judge will only admit such evidence if he thinks fit that yes, this evidence is going to be relevant. If such evidence is not going to be relevant, then the judge will not allow it. If the fact proposed to be proved is one of which evidence is admissible only upon proof of some other fact, such last mentioned fact must be proved before evidence is given of the fact first mentioned. So when there is a condition precedent that such other fact needs to be proved in order to allow the evidence of such fact that the party proposes, then such other fact, that is a condition precedent, that needs to be proved first. So that will be the order of proving of facts, unless the party undertakes to give proof of such fact and the court is satisfied with such undertaking. So if the party proposes that I undertake that I will prove it later, the court must allow me this evidence first. Then if the judge is satisfied, the court is satisfied with such undertaking, then he may allow it. It is upon the discretion of the court. If the relevancy of one alleged fact depends upon other alleged fact being first proved, then the judge may in his discretion either permit evidence of the first fact to be given before the second fact is proved, or require evidence to be given of the second fact before evidence is given of the first fact. So the order of giving evidence may be upon the discretion of the court. Now section 137 is perhaps one of the most important sections of the Indian Evidence Act. It talks about examinations. There are three kind of examinations, that is examination in chief, cross examination and re-examination. So what is examination in chief? The examination of a witness by the party who calls him shall be called his examination in chief. So which party proposes the evidence of any particular witness, that party will give the examination in chief of his witness. Now what is cross examination? The examination of a witness by the adverse party shall be called the cross examination. So whenever a witness is given by any party, the veracity of such witness will be tested through some questions that will be put forward by the adverse party's counsel. That is known as the cross examination of such witness. And what is re-examination? The examination of a witness subsequent to the cross examination by the party who called him shall be called the re-examination. So there is a provision to re-examine a particular witness by the person who has called him. So examination in chief and re-examination will be done by the same party who is giving the evidence, and cross examination will be done by the adverse party. Now why will we allow re-examination? It says that whenever cross examination is done And after that, if such kind of particulars are to be proved further in accordance with such examination chief or cross examination, or if there are some points that are left out that are not proved by that witness, then that will also be covered under re-examination. Where a party not subjecting to cross examination in spite of order of court, it is not safe to rely on examination in chief. So whenever a cross examination is not done in spite of an order of the court, then such examination in chief will not be safe to rely upon. So basically, that has no such practical value. So let us quickly understand the distinction between these three kinds of examination. So examination in chief is the examination of a witness by a person who is himself calling him. Cross examination is the examination of witness by the opposite party, that means the adverse party. And re-examination is the examination of witness to remove any inconsistency which may have arisen during the examination in chief and cross examination. That is the sole purpose of re-examination. The order of examination in chief is the first, the cross examination is the second in order, and the re-examination is the last in order. The purpose of examination in chief is to take such testimony for which he is called by the party. The purpose of cross examination is to test the veracity of the witness by impeaching his credit, like I was saying. And the purpose of re examination is to remove inconsistency which may have arisen during the other examinations. Now, no leading questions may be asked in examination in chief without the permission of the court. But in cross examination, you can ask leading questions and it can be asked freely. But in re examination, leading questions cannot be asked again because it is somewhat equal to the examination in chief in terms of procedures, and no new matter should either be introduced in re examination without the permission of the court. That we also need to keep in our mind, that no further new matter shall be introduced without the permission of the court. Re-examination is only to clarify or remove the inconsistency that may have arisen during the last two examinations, that is the examination in chief and the cross examination. Examination in chief is part and parcel of a judicial proceedings. Cross examination is the most essential for extracting the truth and is also an essential part of the judicial proceedings. And re-examination is not necessary, it is not essential part of the judicial proceedings, it just clarifies or removes the inconsistency, that's all. Now let's move on to section 138. It says order of examination. So the witness shall be first examined in chief, then if the adverse party so desires, he will be cross examined, and if the party calling him so desires, will be re-examined with the permission of the court. Examination and cross examination must relate to relevant facts, but the cross examination need not be confined to the facts of which the witness testified on his examination in chief. So there are ample possibilities of cross examining questions that are apparently not relevant but otherwise relevant may also be asked. So cross examinations do not need to be direct, because the very purpose of cross examination is to check or test the veracity of that witness, and in order to do that, several kind of questions may be thrown at him. But examination in chief shall be precise and shall be within the ambit of the facts in issues of the case, while cross examination may be diverse regarding the relevancy of facts that are involved in that case. Now what will be the direction of the re-examination? The re-examination shall be directed to the explanation of matters referred to in cross examination, and if new matter is by permission of the court introduced in re-examination, the adverse party may further cross examine upon that matter. So if the party is giving a re-examination upon new matters with the permission of the court, then adverse party may further cross-examine upon that matter. Section 139 talks about cross-examination of person called to produce document. A person summoned to produce a document does not become a witness by the mere fact that he produces it, and cannot be cross-examined unless and until he is called as a witness. So a person who is just the bearer of the document that needs to be produced, he does not himself become a witness just because he produces such document. He will have to be called as a witness in order to cross-examine him. Section 140 talks about witnesses to character. It says witnesses to character may be cross-examined and re-examined. So we have that opportunity. And section 141 talks about leading questions. any question suggesting the answer which the person putting it wishes or expects to receive is called a leading questions. Generally, leading questions are those questions when the answer is already known to the question maker. So the question maker desires such answers. Say for example, he already knows your age, but he still asks you. Now these kind of questions are thrown at the witness just to set the plot for a further question that would generally check the veracity of such person. So if there is a concerned question that will check the veracity of that witness, and in order to answer such question, the court needs to get satisfied that such person is qualified enough to answer such question, then a leading question may be asked as to the qualifications of such person who is giving such witness. Now the question maker may already know the qualifications of that person, but still he may ask it as a leading question because he knows that the answer of such question will generally set up the plot for the next question that would essentially be targeting to check his veracity. That is where leading questions become very crucial. Now, leading questions, as we know, are generally asked freely in cross examination because it is for the purpose to set a plot to check the veracity of that witness, and they are not asked in examination in chief or re-examination. Basically, leading questions are yes or no questions, but it does not have to essentially be so. Now section 142 and section 143 talks about when leading questions must not be asked and when they may be asked. Section 142 talks about when they must not be asked. Those leading questions must not, if objected by the adverse party, be asked in an examination in chief or in a re-examination like we were already talking about, except with the permission of the court. So in chiefs and in re-examinations they cannot be asked. But section 143 says that leading questions may be asked in cross examination. Now section 144 talks about evidence as to matters in writing. So any witness may be asked whilst under examination whether any contract, grant or other disposition of property as to which he is giving evidence was not contained in a document, and if he says that it was, or if he is about to make any statement as to the contents of any document which in the opinion of the court ought to be produced, the adverse party may object of such evidence being given until such document is produced or until facts have been proved which entitle the party who called the witness to give secondary evidence of it. Evidence regarding the contents of a document may be objected by the adverse party to be given into evidence unless the original or the secondary evidence, that means the certified copies of such document, is produced before the court. So a person cannot come up and give evidence about any particular document and its contents. That document needs to be brought before the court so that a proper chance of cross examination may be given to the adverse party. Now explanation says a witness may give oral evidence of statements made by other persons about the contents of documents if such statements are in themselves relevant facts. So only in cases of where the statements that are regarding the contents of such documents are themselves relevant facts, then oral evidence may be given by such witness. Section 145 talks about cross examination as to previous statements in writing. So a witness may be cross-examined as to previous statements made by him in writing or reduced into writing and relevant to matter in question. So whenever a witness has given any statement before the court in writing, or whenever he has orally given it and it was reduced to writing, then such person can be cross-examined regarding any of the contents of such statements that was either given in writing or reduced to writing without such writing being shown to him. So he will not be shown that, he will be asked out of his memory. But if it is intended to contradict him by the writing, his attention must, before the writing can be proved, be called to those parts of it which are be used for the purpose of contradicting him. So whenever it is to contradict him, his attention may be brought into such contradicting part that is to be used against him. So that is the procedure under section 145 for cross examining a witness as to any previous statements that was given in writing or reduced to writing by him. Section 146 talks about questions lawful in cross-examination. So when a witness is cross-examined, he may, in addition to the questions herein before referred to, be asked any questions which tend to test his veracity, to discover who he is and what his position is in his life, or to shake his credit by injuring his character, although the answer to such questions might tend directly or indirectly to criminate him or might expose him to a penalty or forfeiture. So whenever a person is cross-examined, what kind of questions we have already read in this chapter may be asked. And in addition to those questions that are herein before referred, these three kind of questions can also be asked to that person. What kind of questions? Questions that would test his veracity, whether he is speaking the truth or not. Questions to discover who he is and what his position in his life is. So that kind of questions may also be put forward to him, and to shake his credit by injuring his character. So any kind of questions that would injure his character or shake his credit, or that may directly or indirectly criminate him or expose him to a penalty or forfeiture, all these kind of questions can be asked in cross examination, along with those questions that we have already read before in this chapter. Now, provided that in a prosecution for an offense under these sections that are all regarding the offense of rape and various kinds of rapes, or for attempt to commit any such offense where the question of consent is an issue, it shall not be permissible to adduce evidence or to put questions in the cross examination of the victim as to the general immoral character or previous sexual experience of such victim with any person for proving such consent or the quality of consent. So wherever the consent is the primary concern that is to be proved during such cross examination, then no questions that deals with general immoral character or previous sexual experience of such victim will be allowed to be asked to that victim for proving the consent or the quality of consent. Now section 147 talks about when witnesses to be compelled to answer. So if any such question relates to a matter relevant to the suit or proceedings, the provisions of section 132 shall apply thereto. So he will have to answer those questions. Now section 148 says court to decide when questions shall be asked and when witness compelled to answer. So if any question relates to a matter not relevant to the suit or proceedings, except in so far as it affects the credit of the witness by injuring his character, the court shall decide whether or not the witness shall be compelled to answer it. So when the question is not of a relevant fact to the suit or proceedings, unless it is a question that affects the credit of that witness, the court shall decide whether he will allow such question or not, and whether the witness shall be compelled to answer it or not. Also, the court will warn the witness that he is not obliged to answer it. In exercising its discretion, the court shall have regard to the following considerations. Such questions are proper if they are of such a nature that the truth of the imputation conveyed by them would seriously affect the opinion of the court as to the credibility of the witness or the manner to which he testifies. So the court will allow such questions if they seriously affect the opinion of the court regarding the veracity of such witness or the credibility of such witness or on the matter to which he testifies. Or subsection 2 says such questions are improper if the imputation which they convey relates to matters so remote in time or of such a character that the truth of the imputation would not affect. So whether the truth of the imputation is affecting or not, that is the primary concern of allowing such questions, or would affect in a slight degree the opinion of the court as to the credibility of the witness on the matter to which he testifies. Subsection 3 says such questions are improper if there is a great disproportion between the importance of the imputation made against the witness's character and the importance of his witness. So both the importances will be tested by the court, decided upon, and then such court will allow or disallow. The court may, if it sees fit, draw from the witness's refusal to answer the inference that the answer, if given, would be unfavorable. So if the person does not want to give the answer to any such question, then the court would presume that if such answer would have been given by the witness, it would be unfavorable for such witness. That will be a general presumption taken up by the court. Section 149 says question not to be asked without reasonable grounds. So no questions as referred to in section 148 ought to be asked unless the person asking it has reasonable grounds for thinking that the imputation which it conveys is well founded. So unless he is sure about it, he won't be allowed to ask such question. He must have reasonable grounds. Without any reasonable ground, such question will not be allowed. Section 150 talks about procedure of courts in cases of question being asked without reasonable grounds. So if the court is of the opinion that any such question was asked without reasonable grounds, it may, if it was asked by any barrister, pleader, vakil or attorney, report the circumstances of the case to the High Court or the authority to which such barrister, pleader, vakil or attorney is subject in the exercise of his profession. So that kind of steps may be taken by the court. Section 151 talks about indecent and scandalous questions. The court may forbid any question or inquiry which it regards as indecent or scandalous. That kind of questions will not be allowed by the court. Although such questions or inquiries may have some bearing on the question before the court, unless they relate to facts in issue or to matters necessary to be known in order to determine whether or not the fact in issue existed. So only in those two cases these kind of questions will be allowed, that is if they relate to the facts in issue or if they are otherwise relevant or otherwise determines whether the fact in issue existed or not. Section 152 talks about questions intended to insult or annoy. The court shall forbid any questions which appears to it to be intended to insult or annoy, or which though proper in itself appears to the court needlessly offensive in form. So if any question intends to insult or annoy the witness, or if it appears before the court that it was needlessly offensive, in that form, so then in that case the court may forbid such question. Now section 153 talks about exclusion of evidence to contradict answers to questions testing veracity. So when a witness has been asked and has answered any question which is relevant to the enquiry, only in so far as it tends to shake his credit by injuring his character, no evidence shall be given to contradict him. But if he answers falsely, he may afterwards be charged with giving false evidence. So unless and until the person who is giving such evidence is true in giving such evidence, then he will not be contradicted. But if he is actually giving false evidence regarding any question that was to shake his credit by injuring his character, if he was giving false evidence to such question, he may afterwards be charged with giving false evidence, but not otherwise. Exception 1 says if a witness is asked whether he has been previously convicted of any crime and such person denies it, then evidence may be given of his previous conviction. Also exception 2 says if a witness is asked any question tending to impeach his impartiality, so any question that was put forward before him that would expose him that he is not being impartial, and answers it by denying the facts suggested, he may be contradicted. So if he denies such facts but actually he is being partial and he is lying, then he may be contradicted later on. Section 154 talks about questions by party to his own witness. The court may in its discretion permit the person who calls a witness to put any question to him which might be put in cross examination by the adverse party. So if the counsel for the person who is giving the witness, if he believes that such kind of question will be put in the cross examination by the adverse party, he may beforehand ask such question, and the court may in its discretion permit such question to be asked to his own witness. Nothing in this section shall disentitle the person so permitted under subsection 1 to rely on any part of the evidence of such witness. So he may also rely upon such witness that was the outcome due to the answer to such question. Now, section 155 talks about impeaching credit of witness. The credit of a witness may be impeached in the following ways: by the adverse party or with the consent of the court by the party who calls him. So whenever the credibility of a witness is shaken, it is shaken in the following format as per these three subsections: by the evidence of person who testify that they from their knowledge of the witness believe him to be unworthy of credit. So if they believe from the evidence of the person who is testified or from the knowledge of the witness that he is unworthy of the credit, or by proof that the witness has been bribed or has accepted the offer of a bribe or has received any other corrupt inducement to give his evidence, in that case also, and by proof of former statements inconsistent with any part of his evidence which is liable to be contradicted. So if he has contradicted with the statements that was taken beforehand. Now explanation says witness declaring another witness to be unworthy of credit may not upon his examination in chief give reason for his belief, but he may be asked his reasons in cross examination and the answers which he gives cannot be contradicted. Though if they are false, he may afterwards be charged with giving false evidence. So the same criteria are followed in cases where a witness declares another witness to be unworthy of credit, and he will be asked the reasons behind declaring another witness as unworthy in cross examination as to why he thinks, what is his belief that such other witness is unworthy. And if he has given false evidence regarding such matter, then he may afterwards also may be charged. Section 156 says questions tending to corroborate evidence of relevant fact admissible. So when a witness whom it is intended to corroborate gives evidence of any relevant fact, he may be questioned as to any other circumstances which he observed or at near to the time or place at which such relevant fact occurred. If the court is of the opinion that such circumstances, if proved, would corroborate the testimony of the witness as to the relevant fact which he testifies. So say for example, a witness is asked about a relevant fact. A question has been asked regarding such relevant fact and the witness has answered. Now his answer is of such a kind that there are certain other corroborative evidences that needs to be put forward in support to that answer. So questions on such other corroborative matters may also be asked if they are observed by such witness at or near the place and time where such relevant fact occurred. That is what section 156 says. Section 157 talks about former statements of witness may be proved to corroborate later testimony as to same fact. So in order to corroborate the testimony of a witness, any former statement made by such witness relating to the same fact or about the same time and place where it took place or before any authority legally competent to investigate the fact may be proved. So any former statements may be proved regarding the same facts, the time and place where it occurred or before any authority who is legally competent to investigate the fact. Now section 158 talks about what matters may be proved in connection with proved statements relevant under section 32 or 33. So whenever any statement relevant under section 32 or 33 is proved, all matters may be proved either in order to contradict or to corroborate it. So whenever there is a proved statement under section 32 and 33, thereafter any matter may be proved that would either contradict such statement or that would corroborate such statement, or in order to impeach or confirm the credit of that person by whom it was made. All these kinds of facts may be proved later on, which might have been proved if that person have been called as a witness and had denied upon cross examination the truth of the matter suggested. That is what section 158 says. Section 159 says refreshing memory. A witness may, while under examination, refresh his memory to any writing made by himself at the time of the transaction concerning which he is questioned. So there is an option of refreshing his memory as to the matters on which he is giving his evidence about, or so soon after that the court considers it likely that the transaction was at the time fresh in his memory. The witness may also refer to any such writing made by any other person and read by the witness within the time aforesaid, if when he read it he knew it to be correct. So in those cases he will be allowed to refresh his memory. When witness may use copy of document to refresh his memory. So whenever a witness may refresh his memory by reference to any document, he may, with the permission of the court, refer to a copy of such document, provided that the court be satisfied that there is sufficient reason for the non-production of the original, and an expert may refresh his memory by reference to professional treatises. So this is how the refreshing of a memory of a witness is done. Section 160 says testimony to facts stated in documents mentioned in section 159. So a witness may also testify to facts mentioned in any such document as is mentioned in section 159, although he has no specific recollection of the facts themselves, if he is sure that the facts were correctly recorded in that document. So he may not entirely or specifically recollect the facts themselves, but if he is sure that whatever fact was recorded in that document was done correctly, then he may testify as to the facts that are mentioned in such document that are talked about in section 159. That is what section 160 says. Now section 161 says right of adverse party as to writing used to refresh memory. So any writing referred to under the provisions of the last two preceding sections may be produced and shown to the adverse party if he requires it. Such party may, if he pleases, cross-examine the witness thereupon. He has the right to produce the document to the adverse party if he requires it, and he may also cross-examine the witness if he pleases to do so. Section 162 says production of documents. A witness summoned to produce a document shall, if it is in his possession or power, bring it to court, notwithstanding any objection which there may be to its production or to its admissibility. The validity of any such objection shall be decided on by the court. So a witness who is summoned to produce a document shall bring it to the court if it is in the possession or power of him, and any objection that would be raised for such production or for the admissibility of such document will be decided by the court. Court, if it sees fit, may inspect the document unless it refers to matters of state or take other evidence to enable it to determine of its admissibility. These kinds of things will be done by the court. Translation of documents says if for such a purpose it is necessary to cause any document to be translated, the court may, if it thinks fit, direct the translator to keep the content secret. So the court has the power to direct the translator to keep the content secret unless the document is to be given in evidence. And if the interpreter disobeys such direction, he shall be held to have committed an offence under section 166 of the Indian Penal Code. So the interpreter will have to be working under the directions of the court, and if he does not do so or disobeys, then he will be charged under the Indian Penal Code. Section 163 says giving as evidence of document called for and produced on notice. So when a party calls for a document which he has given the other party notice to produce, and such document is produced and inspected by the party calling for its production, he is bound to give it as evidence if the party producing it requires him to do so. If the party who is producing the document actually produces the document and inspects it before the court, then if the other party says that you will have to give this as an evidence before the court, then he will have to do so. Section 164 says using as evidence of documents production of which was refused on notice. So when a party refuses to produce a document which he has notice to produce, he cannot afterwards use the document as evidence without the consent of the other party or the order of the court. So once he has refused to produce it, even after getting a notice, he cannot afterwards use such document as evidence without the consent of the other party or the court. Section 165 talks about judge's power to put questions or order production. So the judge may, in order to discover or to obtain proper proof of relevant facts, ask any question if he pleases, in any form, at any time, of any witness or of the parties about any fact that is relevant or irrelevant, and may order the production of any document or thing, and neither the parties nor their agents shall be entitled to make any objection to any such question or order, not without the leave of the court, cross-examine any witness upon any answer given in reply to any such question. So the court has the ample power to put questions or require productions that would not be objected by any party. And cross-examination to any witness upon any answer that is given to in reply to any such question that was put forward by the court, such kind of cross-examination will be done only after taking the leave of the court, provided that the judgment must be based upon facts declared by this act to be relevant and duly proved, and provided also that this section shall not authorize any judge to compel any witness to answer any question or to produce any document which such witness would be entitled to refuse to answer or produce under section 121 to 131, both inclusive. So if he is not bound to answer it or not required to produce it, then he may refuse to answer or produce such question or document. If the questions were asked or the documents were called for by the adverse party, nor shall the judge ask any question which it would be improper for any other person to ask under section 148 or 149. So that is also maintained. Nor shall he dispense with primary evidence of any document except in the cases herein before accepted. So these guidelines are need to be followed. And section 166 talks about power of jury or assessors to put questions. It says in cases tried by the jury or with assessors, the jury or assessors may put any question to the witness through or by leave of the judge, which the judge himself might put and which considers proper. Now we do not have the jury system anymore, so this section is not important. Now let's move on to the last chapter with only one section that says no new trial for improper admission or rejection of evidence. So the improper admission or rejection of evidence shall not be ground of itself for a new trial or reversal of any decision in any case. So if there is any improper admission or rejection of any evidence, then that will not itself be a ground for a new trial or reversal of any decision that was given in any case. If it shall appear to the court before which such objection is raised that independently of the evidence objected to and admitted, there was sufficient evidence to justify the decision, or that if the rejected evidence had been received, it ought not to have varied the decision. So when it is found out by the court that there was sufficient evidence to justify the decision that was given by such court, or if the evidence that was rejected, if it was taken or received, it would not vary the decision that much, then in those cases that would not be a ground for a new trial or a reversal of any decision of any case. That is what section 167 says. So that's the end of the Indian Evidence Act of 1872. I hope you have understood this statute. So that's all in this video. If you like my videos, then don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching this video.